Welcome to the L&D Go Beyond podcast, where we gather workplace learning insights from experts to enable the L&D community to go beyond the traditional. This is episode number 14, and we have Joti Joseph to talk to us about learning for L&D professionals. Jyoti is the Director of Talent and Learning at Vontobel in Switzerland. She has over 26 years of global experience in learning and development and in retail banking. Her cross-functional experiences give her unique capability to see situations from multiple perspectives and develop solutions accordingly. Above all, she's one of the nicest people to know on the L&D circuit, and I've known her for a few years. So thank you so much, Jyoti, for joining us. Very welcome.
Thank you so much, Amit. And thank you for this opportunity and that wonderful introduction.
Oh, thank you. It's all my pleasure. I'm very excited by this topic because, it probably doesn't get talked about so often. People who are responsible for shouldering learning in an organization, how are they themselves learning? So, to get started, what are your perspective? Why are you thinking this is an important topic?
So for me, it's going back to the basics. This is not something new. For me, this is something that comes out of common sense. That when we as learning and development professionals go and talk to our stakeholders, and we talk about developing skills, changing mindsets, being open and curious learners, embracing change and technology, whether there is a gap between what we say and how they experience us. And for me, like any other professional who's trying to sell something, it's at the very heart of our own credibility as a community. So for me, it's just common sense that we have to invest in our own capability and literally role model what we're asking our learners or our stakeholders to focus on. That's one. I have to say I was terribly influenced by the last big project that I ran in my previous organization and partnered with Deloitte as a consulting firm. And they gave us a framework in which to kind of anchor most of the work that we were doing. And one of the big pillars was our own capability. And yeah, it kind of reinforced my thinking about why we should always be thinking about developing ourselves along with our communities as well.
So, of course, it is commonsensical to have, those capabilities that can build that credibility. And maybe if we can learn a little bit about the framework, that will be great. Or maybe you're covering in some other format. But what we are discussing today is probably because this is not being done, in spite of being commonsensical. Possibly it's not being done to the extent it should be. That's why it's important.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I think we need to change the phrase common sense. I think it's paradoxical. I think we need to start calling it the rarest sense because it is hard to find. And you're right. I was reflecting on this while preparing for this conversation about, is it true that we don't do it? And I remember doing a e-learning actually with your team on unconscious bias a few years ago, and taught me how to be careful about generalizations. So I think there are pockets in the learning world everywhere across the globe in organizations where they are focusing on the basics and they are developing their own capability. And it is one of those topics that I think needs the spotlight all the time and forever. So one of the big reasons for focusing on our own capability is also humility. The moment a learning professional starts thinking, I've cracked this, or I've got this skill, or I know everything there is to know, that is when the problem begins. Not just with learning and development, but with any expert who starts thinking, he knows everything about something. So for those who are not investing in their development, here is a huge call and invitation to do so. And for those who are, to say, keep at it, because like that famous quote, it only ends once when we're dead. Everything else is work in progress, right? So our development is exactly like that.
Absolutely, and I can completely understand that. It's very easy to think we know a lot, but as you start knowing a lot, you start thinking probably I know much lesser than I thought. So yeah, excellent. And thank you for mentioning that project. Our team loved that, and they still remember you and even the interactions
Yeah.
that happened. Fantastic. So what do you suggest? I mean, how should L&D go about, upskilling themselves, reskilling themselves? Are there specific topics you want to suggest or a process you want to suggest? How would you suggest the L&D professionals should learn, upskill themselves?
So I want to be super careful about how I phrase what we chat about in the next 45 to 50 minutes, in that I want to share my experience as a learning and development professional. And I want to acknowledge the fact that everyone's journey is going to be unique. So I definitely do not want to sound prescriptive in any way. And it goes back to the point of humility. I mean, I'm not in a position to prescribe, but I'm super happy to share my own personal experience and my views on this. And I'll go back to the project with Deloitte that I just mentioned, and how that's informed how I have been focusing on my development as an L&D professional. So we were actually looking at the state of learning in my ex-organization. And in order to evaluate the current state as well as the aspirational state, they gave us a 6-anchored framework.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so powerful that it's funny, I remember it without having to do any Kirkpatrick knowledge test, because it was so practical and so powerful that I remember it after, I think, 3 or 4 years of having done it. So the first was experience, and it was a pretty broad term that covered user experience. And that's a fascinating topic. I think you could do almost a separate podcast on it. So that was one. The second was content. The third was technology. The fourth was data and analytics. The fifth was our own capability, which is what we're talking about right now. And that includes everything: facilitation, the CADI process, design, measurement, and so on. Mm-hmm. And the last was culture. And I love that framework. And when I talk about it, and when I do a presentation to explain the framework, I always have a picture of the Indian masala box that is in every household. And I always think of these terms, and I always think of the mustard seeds and the cumin seeds and the haldi and the, term. And all those ingredients are somehow a fundamental part of our Indian recipe cooking, right? And that's the analogy that I draw with learning. And each one of these, I think there is an opportunity for us as the L&D community to build capability in each of those. And for me, what I have really enjoyed is seeing the connections between those topics. So I don't see those topics as silos. I see how they literally weave into each other in any problem that we're trying to solve or wherever we're trying to add value.
Excellent. So while these are the pillars, so is there a way to get started with these? Do you recommend something in terms of process to go there? I mean, like you said, they're obviously not independent. They are in a way interweaved. And I would say probably culture is a big one, probably all encompassing, and everything will have to fit into whatever culture you already have or are trying to create over a period of time.
Yeah.
So where should, in your view, L&D professionals start? If they see this framework, should they attack capability first, which is probably one of the things or the biggest thing that we are discussing today, but then it has to fit into the larger scheme of things as well?
Yeah. It's a good question. I'm going to play the economist way and say that I don't think there is a good answer to that question in terms of where to start first. And the reason I say that is because of what I said initially, that the context and the environment in which every L&D professional is working is going to be different. So let me try and see if I can elaborate that with some sort of tangible example. So if I am choosing a learning technology like an LXP for an organization, my context is very different from if I'm designing a traditional classroom course for new managers who are managers for the first time. The technology component in the LXP and the data and even the user experience will probably be more predominant in the first case with LXP, whereas with a more traditional, let's say a more conservative organization, which is not up there with technology and is looking at a more, if I may, in inverted commas, an old-fashioned classroom kind of experience for a bunch of 25 managers, it just feels different. So I wouldn't be able to prescribe where to start. What I will say is go back to what you just talked about, and that is culture. So keeping that bigger picture in mind on culture is where I would apply Stephen Covey's principle of starting with the end in mind. Because if you start anywhere else, if you start with the data or you start with the content, or worse still, you start with the technology, I think we as L&D can get massively distracted. So, and I'm almost getting a little bit of my own clarity as I'm answering your question. But if I had to say where to start, I'd probably start right at the beginning with experience and right at the end with culture. And those two would be my starting points of when I'm sitting alone and thinking of how to approach a particular problem or a stakeholder. And then the content, the data, even our own capability then start becoming enablers. But those two things, the experience of the users themselves, the why and the how for them, and then the culture of the environment in which I'm operating are probably the areas where we need to have a better understanding and more curiosity. And then the stuff in the middle starts becoming is what makes us effective and efficient.
What if I, try and frame that slightly differently? How does it sound? So essentially, for an L&D professional, like you said earlier, whoever is trying to sell something or get something achieved, the end objective is probably the user experience that we're talking of. And while we are thinking of that, we need to be conscious of the culture that we currently have, because it will be influencing whatever we do. And all the other bits are going to be possibly moderated, adjusted according to the culture in the quest or attempt to go towards the user experience that we are trying to achieve.
Right. Yes.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. So on the culture itself, if we can, talk a little bit, culture is not something that L&D controls. Culture is something that gets formed even if you don't try. But at the same time, if organization is conscious to create the kind of culture they want, then it has to be driven by the leadership, the senior most leadership. It has to trickle down to other leaderships, line managers as well. And L&D can possibly be enablers in the direction that we want to go, but they may not be really responsible. So what are your experiences and your thoughts regarding the culture part of that framework?
I have seen many different scenarios play out when it comes to culture in the 26 years that I have worked in different countries, organizations, as in departments within the organization. And over time, I have started believing that culture can be influenced at all levels in the organization. There is scale when a senior CEO, when a CEO and his team decide that, we're going to drive a culture of curiosity, or like Novartis talks about an unbossed culture. When the CEO and his top team say that, of course, it's quicker and it scales faster. I have also seen another company here in Switzerland do what they call a culture map.
Mhm.
And what they've done is they've done an analysis within the organization. They've asked everyone, who are the top 5 people that you turn to when you have a problem?
Mhm.
And they've started analyzing these experts and culture champions within the organization who are at all levels, either because they've been there for long and they get the company, or they're experts in their field. And they've started kind of measuring where are these influence hotspots in the organization. And that has nothing to do with leadership. These are people who are thought leaders within their own right because of who they are and what they think and what they can do. And then there is this fantastic young generation that's coming into every organization who is actually not particularly enamored with hierarchy. And they're saying, no, hang on, first make sense to me. Show me, like Jerry Maguire would say, instead of show me the money, it's like show me the value, and then I'll follow you.
Yeah.
So, and the reason I'm saying this to us as L&D professionals is we need to tap into all these different sources of power to influence whatever culture we're trying to influence. So yeah, I agree leaders are important, and I'm saying there are many other ways, like you talked about middle managers as well. And it just reminds me of Margaret Mead, the sociologist's quote, right? Never underestimate the power of a few committed citizens to change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So if as L&D, we are well networked within the ecosystem that we operate, and we are able to identify those people who have power and influence across the levels, I just think it becomes, again, more effective to drive whatever cultural change we're trying to drive. And this is a slow burn. Culture, I always say, again, in terms of analogy, it's a bit like the air you breathe and the water you drink. You can't really put your finger on it, but you'll know when something's wrong. When the air gets too polluted and you can't breathe, you'll pick it up. And culture is exactly like that. And it's these little things. And going back to L&D and the power that we have, I think we have two kinds of power, which are, they're super powerful. One is direct. We are L&D. People come to us for all sorts of things: induction, soft skills training. Every time someone comes to us with a request, our potential power can be unleashed. So that's one, but that's reactive. And then there is a second power, which is what I call influencing without authority. Because we touch so many people and because of our position, we have the power to plant seeds in the minds of leaders, in the minds of managers, and to actually influence the dialogue and the decisions within an organization. And I think, again, in terms of our own capability, the second one is under leveraged. We tend to take the order and execute it well, and our credibility does depend on that. But if we have a nagging doubt in our head that says, I think you can do more, or I actually think you're asking the wrong question, we tend to sometimes stay silent on that because we are interested in managing that relationship with the stakeholder. And I think that second bit, when we tend to keep quiet, is where our exponential power is. We probably need to play with that a little more.
Excellent. There's so much to unpack in there. The differentiation of direct and possibly indirect or influencing power, I think that's great. And I agree that possibly not many L&D people exploit the second set of powers more, and they need to. But that quote was fantastic, which is about few committed citizens, and probably it applies to our talk today, very well for all L&D professionals. If there are a few committed L&D professionals in an organization, it can possibly bring about a big change. But I want to come back to that culture map example that you gave. What are they asking? Are they asking about specific skill areas that if you are stuck on, let's say, selling, who do you go to? If you're stuck on this, who do you go to? Or how is that panning out?
I think it's actually, the honest answer is I don't know the specific questions that are being asked. I think the end objective of that is irrespective. It's not a particular skill, but they're trying to find who are the people in the organization that you go to, and for what? It could be anything. It could be a technical skill. It could be a new joiner trying to find the ropes in the organization. They're just trying to find who are these people that you tend to move to when you're stuck in any sort of situation at work. And the end objective, like I said, is instead of putting all the pressure on these top 15 leaders and the board and whoever, to say that no, there are other sources of power. So if you're trying to bring a transformation in the organization, these are the people that you can actually leverage, because they're the people that, you know, everyone goes to.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. And that's a great way to identify those pockets of power, not really to, uh, go through them for many things, but essentially trying to see if you can create an environment through which these people
Yeah.
can be leveraged for influencing others, because they have that power, soft power, if you can call it.
Yeah.
And while you were saying about Gen Z, I was thinking about, if I were to ask internally at our company, who would you go to for gamification? So there is
Yeah.
somebody who's not,
Exactly.
the highest leadership position, but yes,
Absolutely.
so yeah, I think those kind of pockets would definitely be emerging, and I think it will be very smart to leverage.
I was just going to add, and I would say L&D professionals should aspire to be one of those people. Like I still remember in India, when I was heading the training academy, I had a wonderful team of facilitators. You'd be amazed at the number of people in the organization who came to the facilitator with their problems and not to the HR business partner or to the manager. But because the L&D person had this amazing position of knowing the context of the individual and yet having enough distance so that the person could come and confide and feel safe. And what a privileged position to be in, to then coach the person or guide the person or even facilitate a good dialogue for that person. And yeah, if I'm an L&D person in an organization, I'd want to be one of those people, who's identified as, yeah, this person is somebody I'd go to when I have a problem.
Great example. Yeah. I mean, of course, it has one part of the culture, which is psychological safety, a little bit
Correct.
included there. Yeah, but it'll be a good target for L&D to think about. Yeah, we should be in
Absolutely.
that position.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So if we move to the capability pillar of that framework that Deloitte had given, what all are we seeing within that? Anything specific that you want to highlight for L&D professionals, that this is the area, or does data, tech, etc., all come under the capability that L&D should be really striving for?
Yes. All those 5 components, if you pull capability out, there is scope for us as the community to invest our time, effort, and energy in building. So I did a design thinking course 3 years ago with a company called Luma. It was sponsored by my ex-organization. It was the 10% of the 70-20-10. But my God, it had such a massive influence on my thinking and my approach to everything after I went through that course. And my favorite description of design thinking is common sense attractively packaged. It's not rocket science. Right. None of those design thinking tools of stakeholder map or interviewing or prototyping are, it's not but to apply it in the right context and in the right sequence, and more than apply it, to stick with it. One of the mindsets of the L&D community, I feel, if an experiment or an opportunity is worthy enough, to have a slightly longer term attachment to that work. Because if you go back to the point on data, you have to collect data over time to know whether value is being added or not added, and whether your original hypothesis, whatever that was, is confirmed or not confirmed. You have to be like a scientist, right, from your attitude. And I have a lot of empathy for my L&D community, because let's face it, the orders keep coming in and you don't always have the time and the energy to actually invest in those longitudinal studies where you stick with something over time. But again, that goes back to the capability of the L&D community. What are we saying no to? And if an L&D professional is not saying no 50 to 60% of the time, I would argue that we don't have a strong sense of Pareto's principle. 80% of our value is going to come only from focusing on 20% of our projects and variables. L&D has to have a strong conviction on what are those 20%. And once you have that, you start saying no. Either you start saying no, or you start doing it in, a salesperson style, which is you say no without saying no. And I'll give you a great example of that. In Hong Kong, got called by one of the stakeholders to say, I need writing skills training for my team of investigators. And I said, okay, first let me come and meet you. Let's have a chat. So went and spoke to him, 15 minutes, figured out what this person's looking for is when my team crafts an email, because their English is not the mother tongue. So, it was a different country and you're thinking in your local language and then translating. How do I know that this email is effective? And actually, Outlook email has that Fleisch, I don't know the full term. It's some Fleisch index, which if you turn it on, it actually tells you, can a school student understand the email that you have written?
Yeah,
so how many long...
Readability.
Correct.
Yeah.
School readability.
Yeah.
And he wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
And we just turned that on and he said, whoop, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I'll tell them if the email, and that's it. We didn't need any training. So, you say no, but you haven't said no. And I think probably another good example of our own capability, which is this is not just about knowing L&D stuff, but being curious to know a lot of other stuff, whether it's through technology or about our own businesses, so that we can add value with simple solutions like this that involve no time, no cost, stakeholders super happy, and you've walked away with your calendar intact.
Correct. That's a brilliant example. And again, I think there's too many things packed into that answer. I'm already thinking we'll need a few episodes. But let me try. So I love that design thinking definition, common sense packaged in a manner attractively. I think that's what it is. I have reviewed it a few times and always felt that, why are we not doing it if we are not doing
exactly
it? And things that I'm trying to correlate, most authors and experts in our domain have been talking about, if you are an L&D, first know how the work gets done.
Correct.
And that's exactly what design thinking would tell you. You need to know, how is this person going to do their job? What is their situation? Are they sitting in a air-conditioned room? Are they in a bus holding mobile phone, etc.? Unless you know exactly what, and also to understand what could be the barriers to performance. And the example that you gave is a great example. A slight tweak in a system or environment can enable performance without any elaborate training requirement. That's exactly what should be done in design thinking. So brilliant example.
And can I just quickly add, Amit, 15 years ago when we started in L&D, one of the KPIs that was given to the L&D community was, how many training man days are you delivering out of 22? And let's connect that back to data.
Yeah.
If you design a key performance indicator that drives the wrong behavior, we have only ourselves to blame. So heads of L&D have to be very careful about how are you measuring the effectiveness of your team. In that example that I gave, the trainer effectively lost 2 training man days by not going and finding a training course or designing a training course to deliver.
Yeah.
But is that the right question? Is that the right KPI? Or should the KPI be something that is more wrapped in business context? Back to your point, what is the business doing and how are they adding value? So again, going back to data and how we measure our own effectiveness. And it's really, really a complex topic, because I still remember in our, again, ex company, the pendulum swung, from measuring 13 or 14 training man days, we swung to measuring nothing. And going back, that's again not understanding the culture and change management, but anyway, like you said, we need several podcasts to discuss each of these topics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, you talked about data and how it can help us improve on a more continuous basis rather than being a dipstick. Data
Yeah.
is mostly being used, is especially because of the kind of KPIs we have had, like
Yeah.
bums and seats is probably the most
Yeah.
important one. How much time was spent, how much money was spent,
Yeah.
did we get any efficiency out of that money year on year,
Yeah.
etc. So
Yeah.
we've been always measuring current state of whatever we are doing, rather than has that state improved in terms of performance, learning,
Yeah.
etc. So data is, very powerful, I believe. So very rightly said, it should be leveraged to improve what we are doing going forward.
Yeah.
And what I think of is it has to close the loop rather than close the project. So it closes
Absolutely.
the loop and keeps you moving forward.
Yeah.
Also, you talked about conviction and the how many times you're saying no. And conviction, I believe, is something that uh, comes with practice. It's a combination of confidence and practice. So you may have confidence because you've read. So let's say people hear this and they say, yes, Jyoti has done this and this is probably right, and I agree, this sounds perfect. But they may not have practice. So they are confident that this is probably the right thing to do, but they can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's where, I think what you said possibly makes perfect sense, which is the L&D leaders need to rethink their KPIs. L&D folks need to have that courage to say, let's extend it over a period of time, and also start saying a bit of a no. But it's a more of a consulting kind of a skill that they need to first adopt. Is
Yes.
that a right way to say it?
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Totally. And when we talk about technology, data, and all the other fancy stuff, I also think we as L&D need to go back to our own basics, and consulting and asking the right questions is a skill that is never, ever, ever going to go out of fashion. Not for L&D, not for anyone trying to solve any problem in the world. I was actually talking to my husband this morning, Dominic, and he said something interesting. He said, 30 years ago, it was all about finding the right answer. Today, it's about finding the right question.
Absolutely.
Because you have an information overload today. All the answers are there, but the point is, are you focusing on the right question so that you get the right piece of information to solve your problem? And for L&D, that is absolutely existential for me. And our credibility hinges on that, actually. So, going back to CADI, the process and consulting and asking the right question, I mean, I wouldn't start anything without that. And my India team used to get so tired of me putting this on a slide, but there's a poem, right? 6 honest serving men taught me all I know, what and where and how and why and when and who. And we used to have that before we started any project. And the prioritization of the questions always was why and who first. Who are we serving and why? And then the what, how, the logistical questions of, what are we doing, how, when, where, how much does it cost? And I want to go back to the point you made on conviction. So out of my 26 years, 13 years was in sales. So I was in the business. And then the rest of my career has been learning and development. What that has done for me is it has given me a chameleon-like quality of being able to change my language when I'm talking to a business stakeholder. And when I'm talking to an HR or a learning stakeholder, my language is different. So I will not use Kirkpatrick model L1 when I'm talking to a business stakeholder. I will not use any concept which creates fatigue when I'm talking to a business stakeholder. But when I'm talking to L&D or I'm talking to HR, then I'm more comfortable using language that we understand. Again, common sense. If you don't have that experience, I think it affects conviction when you're talking to a senior stakeholder, because you're thinking, he knows more than me. So if he's saying this is what he wants, then maybe he's right. And your solution there, and it's also a design thinking tool, which is go spend 2 days with the business. Go spend 5 days with the business. One of the KPIs in the learning community by every learning head should be, I don't want to see you in the department for 5 days a month. I want to see you sitting in a contact center or in the risk department or whatever. And the more you do that, the more you will pick up, like you said, what is the environment? What is the language? How much email is being used? How much phone is being used? And when you start getting that, you will find that your language, when you deliver a solution, starts changing because you start speaking the language of the people you've spent time with, and your credibility automatically goes up. So each one has to figure out his way on this journey, actually.
Oh, that's absolutely essential, and brilliant point. I was actually reading a book by Rance Green on instructional stories design, and the examples that he gives, he always talks of creating an action list rather than learning objectives. Nobody
Yeah.
understands learning objectives when maybe they can, but they don't
Yeah.
really relate with that. So just ask them, what actions should the audience be doing, which
Yeah.
is what we'll focus on. So they are very interested because they want their people to be doing those actions.
Absolutely.
So absolutely, yes. Brilliant. All right. So you talked about, this being that course that you did on design thinking being 10%, or that 70-20-10 part of being in that 10% category.
Yeah.
So where does 70-20-10 actually fit in for L&D as you think about all of these? Is it one of the capabilities they need to figure out, or is it more than that?
For me, it's an attitude, actually.
Mhm.
It's a mindset for me. So
Mhm.
I'll stick to my design thinking example. And I love 70-20-10.
Mhm.
I not necessarily hung up on the numbers. It could be
Same.
60-30,
Yes.
whatever. That's not the point. And, trust some of us experts to get caught up in the wrong end of the argument, right? The spirit really is all our knowledge and theory in the world amounts to nothing if it's not put into practice. And not only just practice, but if you can't prove value, right? It's like starting a relay race that has 4 legs, and you've got to cross each leg and finish the race for you to be sure that you've added value. Like you said, closing the loop. So when I did my design thinking course, I just found the 36 tools that they had. And anyone who's interested, by the way, lumaworkplace.com gives you 30 days free access to the tools.
Wow.
In fact, I think they've made the tools free now for everyone. Just check out the website. So lumaworkplace.com. And those 36 tools, when I saw them, my immediate, the way my wheels in my head started turning was, how do I bring these tools not just while I'm designing learning, but when I'm doing anything? So for example, when I run a meeting with 4 people where we are trying to evaluate the pros and cons of a particular decision, I use the design thinking tool of either Rose Thorn Bud, which is what did you like, what did you not like, what can be improved, or there's another design thinking tool called Critique. It's very similar. But the beauty of that tool is process. It gives everyone an equal voice. It gets everyone to focus on the good first, then on the bad, and then on the improvement. And if you have 30 minutes, you time box how much time are we going to spend on the rose, how much time on the thorn, how much time on the bud. As a facilitator using the tool, there are so many advantages of that discipline that you get to your outcome at the end of 30 minutes. Now, how many of us have gone to meetings where, the loudest voice will start talking, take up 80% of the time, and the quiet people who may have the best ideas just don't get a chance to speak.
Yeah.
So for me, the 70, and when I use the 10% tool that I picked up in the design thinking course in my day-to-day meetings, which was in the flow of work, 70%, I suddenly found I was getting better outcomes out of my day-to-day meetings. And I still remember the Luma practitioner telling me, that's a novel approach to application. When we did the tools, we thought you will use it as a learning professional, but you're now using it in everything that you're doing. I think it's a mindset of what I call playfulness. Somebody has given you a toy, you as an L&D person have to play with it and see, where does it work, where does it not work. So I'm a massive believer in just this whole connection between application, sharing with peers. I love that, by the way. I keep telling everyone, you spend more time with peers than you spend with your boss. So you learn more from your peers than you will learn from a supervisor, simply because of the amount of time we spend with each other. And it goes back to the point on data. However, that informal learning never gets captured. But so what? I mean, that's okay that it doesn't get measured.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that you may not be able to measure, but
Exactly.
there may be other ways to measure something else. And, there are
Absolutely.
indicators of, so I mean, just thinking aloud here, what is the turnover rate of people? Is our productivity, is our uh, happiness levels in the company are all showing a steady state or
Yeah,
possibly increasing, because that a lot of it is dependent on whether people are actually feeling they are growing or not, they're learning something or
absolutely.
not, do they have a good colleague at work, are they getting heard, etc. And so they may not be directly related, but
You're
yes,
so
there
right.
is possibly some sort of correlation. So yeah, I agree, some of these things we may not be able to measure, but we still need to encourage.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Fantastic. All right. I want to dig a little deeper onto data, which is, one part we discussed that it should be used to move us forward continuously. Uh, at the same time, there is use of data now to personalize learning, make it more adaptive. In some cases, if you have more advanced system, possibly even uh, prescriptive in terms of this is what you may be doing in future, etc. So where do you see L&D getting themselves on this data train? I think my perception is that L&D has been really a little slow on this part.
I'm smiling because I was so bad at maths in school. And I took arts just to avoid mathematics. And I still remember my father coming in when I was filling up my college application form and said, you may be doing economics, but you're going to have mathematics because it's the only pure science in the world and you're not going to be afraid of it. And I'm very grateful to him for not letting me drop that subject. But the reason I share that story is I have been afraid of numbers. I have gone around making stupid comments like, I'm not a data person.
Mm.
And I don't know how many L&D people actually say that. Like, maths doesn't interest me. The data scares me. I don't like Excel. I don't know how to run a pivot. I don't think we can afford it anymore. So there are a couple of ways of handling this. One is to go back to the 20% of 70-20-10. You don't like it, you don't want to do it, go find someone who loves it and partner with that person. I have found in organizations, the data experts are only too happy to partner with other experts and find a solution that is far more effective than if we hadn't engaged them. Why go around trying to get a PhD in data when there are already people out there? You stick to L&D expertise, but go and hang out with those data guys, explain your context and your problem to them, and you'd be amazed at how they will find connections that you couldn't see, but they can see because of the way they approach data. And when we were trying to execute on the learning experience platform project, the role that the data partners played with us in correlating seemingly uncorrelated variables was fascinating. So I think, again, be creative in how you grow your relationship with data. I also think in L&D, we need to start having a little more fun with it. And I remember Rajiv Jayaraman from Knowlescape. I don't know whether you know him, but he basically said, collect data all the time. You never know how that data is going to be put to use. Now, when we in L&D are designing, we don't think about where are all the data points in my design. and how am I going to collect them? And I think we need, again, mindset. We need to start changing the way we think about design and data. And I told you earlier, in those 6 things, everything is related. Because of what the pandemic has done to all of us and changed our relationship with technology, the wonderful thing about that is the kind of data that you have today. Because people are online, the moment they are online, you've started generating data. And then how to actually analyze that. The only caution I will sound here, it can turn out to be a rabbit hole. So I'll go back to my original thing of, you said, what are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do? And the data is always informing that bigger question rather than it becoming an end in itself. I mean, the number of people who waste time, I think, on number crunching and then actually come out with nothing is also sad.
Thank you for sharing your personal story. It makes a lot of sense, and it should give confidence to other L&D people, because I can completely understand if you've not been, fascinated by that subject, you can develop that sort of a attitude. I'm not this. I can't do this, etc. And as a father, I know my daughter is really, she hates maths. I'm trying to get her onto maths a little bit, but yeah, I mean, great point. That thank you for sharing that. The solution that you mentioned is equally brilliant. Partnering, and that is the 20% of the 70-20-10. But partnering can be very powerful. It's usually the case of
Absolutely.
1 + 1 being more than 2. They can come up with their ideas, you can go with their ideas, you are supporting them to utilize their skills in a better manner to generate insights which are actually meaningful. They may be doing some things in silos which may not be as meaningful, and you may be doing things which is not having any data contribution to that extent. So yeah, I think partnering can be really, really powerful.
And my mom is 70. She solves 80% of her day-to-day problems by going to YouTube. And she's a massive inspiration to me. I don't go to YouTube as often. But the reason I bring that up is especially on simple things like Excel, running a pivot. I think the L&D community needs to start going to YouTube if we are not. I'm sure most of us are. But those who are not, start going. You'd be amazed in those 90-second videos how many of your problems get solved, right from finding duplicates in a column to running a pivot to managing filters. It's all out there. There's no excuse for not knowing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like you said earlier, I think your husband said it. Asking the right questions is what is really important. Answers are all there.
Absolutely.
Whatever you want to do, it's all available. Maybe for some proprietary knowledge or systems, it may be within the firewalls of an organization. But for general knowledge, general science, general items of use, it's all out there. So you just need to know the right question to ask, and you'll find it. The question that I had to follow up with this was, how do you see XAPI emerging? If you have leveraged it, what are your experiences? I don't see a lot of organizations, going towards XAPI with the right intent as to how that's going to help them track those interactions or movements or moments. They are still looking at it as end of course completions and scores and those kind of things.
I'm going to do what we find very difficult to do in L&D, which is I'm not dead sure I fully understand the term. So if you define it for the audience, I will pick up on that definition and then tell you what I think. So when you say XAPI, what do you mean?
Sure. So this is the experience API, or tin can, which was framed as tin can earlier. And it is the, supposed to be a, next version of SCORM. And the design was essentially aimed at and focused at removing the problems that SCORM had, especially getting into mobile-based learning, and also bringing in a new thought process around that learning is everywhere. It is not just coming from your LMS. It's not coming from just courses that are assigned by someone. Learning is in a YouTube video, like you said. Can it be tracked? Learning is in documents. Can it be tracked? Learning is an action that you're doing. Can it be tracked? So what XAPI does is lets you set triggers, so you can do some automatic tracking. So imagine a footballer playing, and maybe they have a scanner or some sort of a sensor, which the coach also
Yeah.
is carrying the other part of that equipment, and they can touch it and
Yeah.
they may capture some data,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
Or it could be fed. So data could be fed into the system. So either it is self-triggered through a mechanism, or it could be fed into the system. What it's trying to do is capture those moments and then see it, in a larger picture, and possibly analyze it in granular detail also.
Yeah. I think when we tried the LXP project with, like I said, the previous company, there was these interfaces that were happening with digital content libraries. So you had, whether it was Degreed or Redcast or whichever LXP we were looking at, and then again, through them, it was a seamless search experience, but they were interacting with the LinkedIn Learning and the Udemy's and maybe your SharePoint on the intranet, and there was this massive collection of data that was happening, coming into the L&D community. That basically, I think what it does, it changes the volume of data that you have access to. That is one. It also changes the quality of data. So from going back to doing an L1 survey at the end of a classroom to now knowing what did you search for, whether you hit a video or an article, did you see it till the end? After you saw it, did you share it? And I think those data points are super, super powerful as a result of those interfaces. I don't think we are there yet on how we're using that to make the next decision on what actually adds value to our users and experience. And I think it goes back to our discomfort with the volume of data and the nature of data, and the ability to then go back and see how it is connected to some of the core questions that we're asking and the decisions we're making. But I think the future is going to be about these interfaces. But again, I'm just thinking about the kind of dilemmas that we're having at the moment. You don't have unlimited budgets. You have to make prioritized choices about which content libraries and which technologies you're going to invest in. And again, the point of focused targeted audiences versus enterprise-wide value. So I think, again, the technology, the data, the content, and the experience are all connected in terms of the decisions that we make. And we never talk about culture in this conversation, right? Because it is not exciting. But funnily enough, if you ask me, out of that Pareto's principle of focusing on the 20%, it's not sexy to do it. But I would invite all of us to really think about that. How many times have we seen content libraries not being used at all, or technology being totally disregarded? And that is only because we are ignoring the hard bit of what is our ecosystem, who are our people. So I'm not dead sure I answered the question well, Amit, but yeah.
So you touched on some very important points there, and very interesting the way we are also kind of exploring how data can be really used. And one of the ways that we are thinking of currently is, can we use data for spacing out learning, as well as introducing more practice? Within that, if you can have confidence based assessments or practice, what you are going to get over a period of time is how is the confidence improving, and is the skill improving at the same time. So
Yeah.
the combination of that is in some way a measure of, is the conviction improving. So if you had a program that you gave or delivered this week, over the next 4 weeks, can we do more practice,
Yeah.
space out, and measure all of those things? That could be a very important use of it. And there are various other ways in which data can be leveraged. But I'm personally very excited with XAPI. The starting premise is very, very powerful, which is learning is not just through courses in LMS. It is everywhere.
Absolutely.
And when we start recognizing that and bringing it into practice, we can do so much more.
You're absolutely right. And while I was listening to you, I was thinking of two things. over the years as an L&D professional, my language has changed to use the words learning less and less, and to use the words performance and, like you said, action more and more. There is something about associating learning with something much narrower and more HR and more courses that switches people off sometimes. But the moment you say, I want to help you do better in your job, like you said, action list. And I think, again, from a development point of view for us in L&D, we need to start thinking about our own language and how we're communicating with our audience. And the second thing I'll say on XAPI is the whole concept of feedback. We in L&D need to get super, super, super curious and passionate about feedback. And that feedback is not about sending a survey and asking somebody, did you like it? If you go back to my design thinking course, they'll tell you, when you ask someone something in a survey, what they say, what they do, and what they say they do can be three very different things. So what I like about XAPI and that collection of data through these interfaces is that's your moment of truth. If I spent 18 minutes on Ken Robinson's TED Talk from start to finish, you can't argue with that. Because I've spent 18 minutes from start to finish without getting distracted, listening, and I may have commented or whatever. All that is feedback. The time I spent, the comment, the share. And I love that topic because suddenly feedback has become something which is so much more complex and true than just sending out an L1 survey and saying, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, tell me, did you like my course?
Absolutely. I can't agree more on that.
Yeah.
I think this is feedback is really the missed opportunity. It is such a powerful learning tool. And I was talking to Patty Shank on one of the previous episodes. In fact, it was episode 12. And she had written a book on writing better multiple choice questions. And we were talking about that. And feedback is an important aspect for, obviously, through assessment, we have opportunities for feedback, whatever be the kind of assessment. And that's why we were talking about feedback. And she was also mentioning this, that feedback is really a wasted opportunity. So maybe we can do better with that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. I think, you've given me so many new thoughts and ideas. I'm sure we'll reconnect and have another episode soon. But before we let you go, are there any books that you would recommend, which you have read or you've found interesting in the last maybe 12 months, 24 months?
I'm going to respond very quickly to that, but I'm going to flip that question back to you because I know you're an avid reader and you post these really cool synopses on LinkedIn about what you've read and how you reflect on it. So I'm going to definitely ask you to answer that question. I started reading Nick Shackleton Jones's How People Learn, and I'm still reading it. One of the things as I've grown older is I have learned to slow down my reading pace so that I can actually think and reflect on what I'm reading about and not with the objective of just finishing the book. And I love listening to Nick Shackleton Jones. I mean, if you've heard any of his talks or if you follow him on LinkedIn, great guy to kind of just follow. So I would definitely invite people to do that. I would also invite the L&D community to just generally read, listen, and watch diverse things. So right now I'm doing Kim Scott's Radical Candor. If anyone is developing a manager development program, what a fantastic book to read. She talks about caring personally and challenging directly. And if you're a great manager or a great professional, you would do both, and how to kind of do that. And then I'm my father's daughter, so I read 3-4 books at the same time. Don't finish one. And I'm reading Yuval Noah Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Fascinating read. Again, as a L&D person and just as a professional anywhere, he has an amazing take on, right from artificial intelligence to biotechnology to religion. to immigration, a real world view on, some of the lessons. So, and I think you and I were talking about make it stick. I'm sure you will bring it up in your answer.
Oh, yes.
So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm not really that avid a reader. I just picked up reading a little recently, but yeah, last year has been good. Nick's book was one of the most difficult book to finish. It has so much packed in it, and it challenges a lot of assumptions. So I also read it a little slowly when I read it last year. But for me, yes, make it stick is probably my number one recommendations. I recently posted a LinkedIn post on top 5 books for L&D professionals. So make it stick was there, which I believe is amazingly well written, and it is just packaged with a lot of research insights about how learning actually happens.
Right.
So it's probably the fountainhead of a lot of other books, that the way I sense from different writers who are writing books. Nick's book was one of those that featured in that. There was another one which I really liked, which was the Checklist Manifesto by
beautiful.
Atul Gawande. Yeah. It's fantastic, and it gives you a very different perspective of what else you can focus on and how solutions could be actually implemented to improve things, because not everything can be learned also. So that was great. I loved Julie Dirkson's book on designing for how people learn.
Okay.
That was great, because it brings in theory to actual application. So it brings the theory of, learning into how do you use it to design. So one of the things that I still, reflect on, there's so many things, but the one was which I had not thought of earlier was if you're going to have job aids in the actual work, then you need to have job aids in the course to let people perform tasks with job aids as part of practice.
Nice.
So a lot of times we may think that let's do a course and then job aids are separate. So job aids need to be part of the course for them to practice with job aids. So that was kind of
nice.
And then there are many more things. But so today maybe those 4 are great. I just finished slightly off topic, of course, not L&D, but I finished Psychology of Money this week.
Okay.
Which is a great self-help book. A lot of financial assumptions quashed and explained through stories, which is again very well written.
Yeah.
My next book is actually a more traditional, if you want to call it, on designing e-learning. So I have the new edition of Michael Allen's book. I read his earlier book many years ago, but I have the new edition, which I want to pick up again.
You make me want to read more again. I have lost my reading habit, but talking to you always gets me to want to read more. And the other quick invitation to everyone who listens to this is, LinkedIn. L&D community needs to get into LinkedIn. Chinese proverb, show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are. I have amended that to, show me who you follow on LinkedIn and I'll tell you who you are. So we need to start getting more active on LinkedIn as well.
That's a great one. That's a great one. Yeah. But yes, absolutely. I think LinkedIn is fast developing into a great place where you can have these meaningful conversations with like-minded people, and you can have different perspectives. So even if you think this way, you can certainly find someone else is saying this may not be the right thing, which is great because that's what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
We won't learn without being challenged. We won't learn without being heard, without we putting out things over there. So if we approach LinkedIn as a learning platform, I think there's nothing better than that.
Absolutely. It's the 20% applied, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally.
But thank you so much, Jyoti. I really appreciate this time. And I would like to end with the disclaimer that all the views that Jyoti expressed are her personal views, nothing to do with any of her employers. But once again, really, really appreciate your time, Jyoti.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I don't know how time flew. So
Yes,
thank you.
it's moving on. Thank you very much.
Thanks.